right. Welcome to the last part. No, sorry. Second part of architectures. So we'll discuss the monolith architecture first, but I'll start with the metaphor right on. Uh, the best metaphor to understand this long term is via cities. A monolith architecture is isolated city. So, like an isolated country like North Korea, where all of the features or all of the components are in one city or country. So they rely on their own products and services. Um, so for microservice architecture, which we will discuss later, it's like interdependent city. Interconnected city, but they are they are specialized with like education, hospital, or law, engineering. So different cities are specialized for its own, and they don't combine all the services in one city. So that's the microservice. First, in monolithic, we will discuss the advantages, and of course, we will provide an example. Usually for monolithic architecture, you can create that in one file or one directory. I'll show you guys an example of this. So here's a monolith in a single file. I'll show you the monolith in a single file for a moment here. So it's just one HTML. So let's check. It's in one file. So this is an example of monolith in one file. Let's open this in VS Code. Here, so as you can see, you have the same structure of HTML body. Click the button, and then there's one script. Uh, and this is the diagram for monolith app. Here's the application, user interface, business logic layer, data access layer, and database. So in a single app. The advantages of this is to the you usually want only need one file or directory. Only one environment needs to be configured to build and deploy the software. Disadvantages: the larger an application gets, the harder it is to extend and maintain. You commit to a certain set of technologies right from the start, which is difficult to change later. As functionality is added and redeveloped, a monolithic architecture runs the risk of not understanding, overseeing, changing relationships, dependencies, and implications. So let's open a folder providing an example of monolithic in one directory. So for one directory, this is the structure, guys. There's one folder called monolithic index script.js and style.js. If you can see, guys, we just separate those uh, CSS and JavaScript from the HTML we created earlier. So that's the monolithic service-oriented architecture. So for service-oriented architecture, it's different. There's a nuance on its difference with monolithic and microservice because in a way it's kind of like monolithic and in a way it's also kind of like microservices. So here's the diagram to best explain this service oriented. So in this model, you see that the services are separated using message bus. So These services can actually be implemented in different servers, but in this case, we only use this in one app, which in case monolithic app. So these services are separated to each other by a message bus. So it allows you to decouple the services in an app so that one service failure would not affect the whole app. So it allows you to create that features without affecting uh, the app. So that's one of the advantage of SOA. Uh, it allows individual services to be reused. Implementation of individual services can take place independently of one another. So one metaphor for this is like a city. It's still a monolith city, which is isolated, but it now separates its services into districts. Let's say one district are for engineering, for uh, medicine, and then law, and then um, and other or etc. Right? So services can even run on different service. Message bus prevents the services from being directly coupled to each other. In the next video, we will discuss this message bus. Fifth advantage, it ensures that the entire system can be easily extended with additional services. So this system, unlike Monolith, where adding a service is hard. So in this service-oriented approach, it allows you to create and extend services or features easily. Disadvantages, complexity that arise due to communication between individual services. So instead of just using one file, if you're just creating a small app in a monolithic file, you need to configure or to create communication between services instead of directly communicating them. And then the provision of the message bus and the associated communication is more expensive in total than direct communications between individual components in a monolithic architecture. So instead of directly using it, you create communication which adds overhead to the total communication or bandwidth of the application. Microservices. So here now we're on the microservices. So it's I'll show you an example first of the service oriented before we go to the microservice. So here's an example of service oriented in one file. Here, let's close this. Here's an example of that. And when we open this, oh, here. So this one file can be divided in this structure. If you see index.html, I'll show the folder, guys. So here's it. It is in one file. If we divided that in a service-oriented architecture, here's what it look like. It looks like here. There's an app.js, which is here, index.html, and here you import the app.js using the SRC, and then services.js as well, and then the styles.css is here on your href and link on the head. So that's an example of that, but let's try to open this up in here. It has the same function as the one single file. And for the microservice, here's the diagram here. So as you can see, all each service has its own data. So the way you deploy this service is separate. So it's unlike the full stack MERN app that uh, we saw in the previous videos, where the back end in total, all the features or services are implemented in one app or in one Docker. So here you will, in microservice, you implement this service separately in separate backend, and then you configure the communication, right, using the its own security. So yeah, the communication between the presentation layer and the microservices, as well as the communication between microservices themselves, usually takes place via what's called a gateway or API gateway. So here's the gateway, guys. Here, um, that line. So that's how the microservices communicate. The metaphor for this in interconnected cities is that imagine a city where you communicate via bridge or via signal or phone. It allows those are the API or a gateway, the bridge or boat. Those are the two transportation you use to communicate with different cities with different specialties. So that's the metaphor to understand it long term. Advantages: if at runtime a microservice is considered too slow, for example, because too many requests are being made to it, another instance of the same microservice can simply be created so that requests can be distributed. Load balancing. So let's say you have a service where you get, uh, let's say, this component. Let's say you have this service, the cart, wherein whenever you click the cart, it allows you to show the recent added items of the customer. In this case, since let's say there's a lot or there's a huge uptick of requests in the cart because of sale, for example, in an e-commerce app. Let's say that feature is in just one um, monolithic application, then the app will crash. You won't be able to serve those customer. Unlike with microservice, if you have a microservice, it allows you to scale your that feature uh, independently of the whole app by adding more instance of it. So that's what it meant by that. It can scale better than other architecture approaches. So it can scale better than SOA or Monolith or the previous topic, which is the multi-chair for modern web architecture, client to server. So microservices are the most scalable, suitable for applications that need to be extremely scalable, such as the Netflix streaming platform, YouTube, Facebook. Those big technology companies needs their application to be scalable because they're serving millions or hundreds of millions of people. Disadvantages: it involves a large development and maintenance effort because each feature uh, has to be developed or has to be deployed by a team of experts. So just like a city can transact with each other even though they have different language because they have system. Just like China, Hong Kong speak Cantonese and China speak Mandarin, but they can still um, uh, transact with each other because of that microservice system. Component-based architecture. So component-based architecture has the same advantage of monolith because component-based, just like my app, uh, but before that, I'll show you an example of microservices for one file microservices in one directory and microservices in three directory, which is more realistic. Here's in one file, get user, get product. As you can see, it has that feature. When we click this directory here, index.html, get user, get product, it has the same feature. We just divide that microservices in different file for it to be scalable. Here's the code for that. App.js index log service.js user.service. And here is the diagram for that. Here in one folder, index.html, styles.css, user, product, app. Here is the more realistic microservices multi-folder. So as you can see, guys, it has three directory. First is this top directory. Second is this, sorry, it has actually three directory inside this microservices multi-folder. First is user service. Inside it, there's a user service.js. You can add further features on this based on your app goals. Product service. Inside this product service.js. Log service. Inside this log service.js. So those are three directories. If we open that, it has the same feature as one in the first directory. If we open the microservice, realistic microservice here, here's the structure. And then if we open that, it has the same feature, but the structure is now more scalable. A component-based architecture, an example of this is my application, which is my blogging application. And here is the diagram for that. Here, this component could be applied in microservices or monolith application. In my case, it's a monolith app because this backend is deployed in one go for all the features. Here, the reason why it's component based is because React is a component based, meaning that this component, let's say delete post, can be reused in different front end. So this component mostly means or mostly tackles about the front end. So when you say component based architecture, it mainly deals with the front end rather than back end. So when you say component based, you mean that for every feature you create, you can import that like here in React in other parts of the front end as well. So that front end, like this delete post button, becomes a widget or a UI component that you can reuse throughout the front end of your app instead of redoing all of this UI component all over again. So that's the component-based advantage. It has the same advantage of monolith. Features can be reused within the application without much effort. Frontend is divided into reusable. Sorry, it has the same advantage of micro. It almost like has the same advantage with microservices because you get to reuse the component in the front end. Frontend is divided into reusable UI components like widgets. You can define component in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript using JSX syntax in React. So we just need to add this in React. Disadvantages. So component-based architecture, imagine like a city. Instead of having a one central marketplace, imagine a city where there is local shops that allows to interact with local services. So it separate the component of one city. It's still monolith, but it's separate the local shop or the marketplace into local shop or components. Disadvantages, the larger an application gets, the harder it is to extend and maintain because it has the monolith kind of similarities. That's why it's harder to extend. You commit to a certain set of technologies right from the start, which is difficult to change later, like what my uh, React app. I committed in one framework for the features, which is React. So let's say I want to change it to Java later, this delete post button, I can. Which bring us to the next topic, micro front end architecture. So for micro front end, it's like microservice in the back end apply in the front end. The service or the front end or UI component is deployed separately. Unlike this component base, this full front end is deployed individually in one file in Netlify. So for micro front end, each of these delete post, edit post is deployed separately. So each development team works on it as well. But the advantage is that you can easily change the you can easily scale it, add multiple instance, and you are more flexible in changing language than this component base. So separate front-end app with its own build deployment and repository. That advantage of this is it's separate front-end app with its own build deployment and repository. Then it would be micro and architecture. If at runtime a microservice is okay, so it has the advantage of the microservices in the back end. It has ability to scale, suitable for application that needs to be extremely scalable. Disadvantage, it involves a large development and maintenance effort. And that's it, guys. So to sum it up, we discussed monolithic and microservices for front end, micro front end, and then service-oriented architecture. In the next architectures, we will discuss messaging architecture, which is connected to service-oriented architecture, web service architecture, and MV architecture. So this MV has three parts, but we will discuss that later. These are just basic or the start. There could be a lot of architectures. That's the reason why I mentioned that multi-chair could have different views or tier. It could have an unlimited tier. It has different views that's make web application development complicated. That's why there's an entire role just for configuring or thinking about this architectures because I would say it's the most complicated because you get to, but it's really depend on different people. But again, guys, thank you for watching and see you on the next video. Peace.